Hi, I'm Jenny Champeau. I'm the director of the Book of Mormon Art Catalog, and I'm here today with George Hanley. Dr. Hanley is a professor of interdisciplinary humanities at BYU. His creative writing, literary criticism, and civic engagement focus on the intersection between religion, literature, and the environment. Among his many publications are Home Waters, A Year of Recompenses on the Provo River, and If Truth Were a Child, which was published by the Maxwell Institute. Today we're looking at some verses from Alma, chapters 30 to 31. And the painting we're looking at is by the artist Walter Rain, and it's called All Things to Note There Is a God. Walter Rain did this in 2003, and you're probably familiar with it. It showed up in the Come Follow Me Book of Mormon manual in 2020, and also again this year in 2024. George, first of all, can you just tell us what's happening in this painting? Who are the figures and what's going on? What's the story here?
Yeah, sure. This is a beautiful and compelling image of Alma talking to Korihor, presumably at the very moment where he is appealing to Korihor to say, look, you've already had enough signs. Korihor has asked for a sign, says he will believe if he can have one. And he says, he mentions the prophets and the scriptures, but then he says the heavens essentially also denote that there is a God, and he's obviously here pointing to the heavens. We have the stars in the distance. Korihor is curiously not refusing to look.
Yeah.
And he's also, most of the painting, of course, half of the image is blocked. The sky is blocked by the wall of a man-made structure, so that this kind of 2/3 of the image is sort of this man-made world that he's trying to get Korihor to look beyond into the heavens, and but he's refusing. I think that's kind of curious.
It is, and I noticed too this really open posture of Alma, the way his hand is extended. He's got one hand to his heart. And then Korihor has this very closed, hunched over kind of like posture, and you notice grabbing onto the wall even.
It seems very fearful to me. He seems like he's actually afraid to look, because maybe if he did, something very different would happen in his mind and in his heart.
Mm-hmm. Do you think? I mean, the idea of proving the existence of God by looking to nature it's more complicated maybe than it seems at first glance. Is that something what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think there's undeniable, for me, on an experiential level, when I'm in the natural world, I can't help but feel God's Spirit. I can't help but feel His presence. I think Doctrine and Covenants 88 describes it as beautifully as anywhere in Scripture about the light of Christ being in the light of the stars and the light of the moon. So it's sort of a nice appendage to this verse, but I think it actually is misleading to say that all things prove there is a God, and all things denote that there is a God, maybe as a subtler position. But I think early on, Christian scientists were motivated to try to prove God's existence through the natural world, and they looked for ways of interpreting the natural world for that proof, and unfortunately they ran out of proof. They also kind of misread nature as a result, because they were trying to make nature conform to a human conception of the world. And I think that kind of pride is actually what Korihor is dealing with. He has his own definitive answers to the nature of the world, and he won't open himself up to wonder and to curiosity and to even a sense of mystery, which is, I think, what I feel when I'm in the natural world, and what we tend to find opens us, it breaks us, it humbles us, and it heals us. But I think if we look at nature, I mean, it's the same thing when we listen to beautiful music, or try to engage in relations with our family and friends. If we're constantly trying to wrest things to make them conform to our idea of what things should be, then we actually do more harm than good. So I think he's not. I don't personally subscribe to the idea that if I look at the stars, I'm going to know with definitive evidence that God exists. But with the eyes of faith, I can't help but feel his presence
Right.
in under the stars or in lots of other places. And I actually think most human beings on the planet
Yeah.
feel that. You
Yeah.
know, I really think, even if they don't call it God, they know that they feel healing, they feel enlightened, they feel connected to something larger themselves when they open themselves up to the natural world. So all of us could stand to move away from the man-made world from
Right.
time to time and really experience wonder and sort of a sense of awe in the many, many creations God has made that don't necessarily make a lot of sense to our minds.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, I think it's I think it's just a bit of a simplistic take to say
Sure.
that you can prove
Yeah.
anything.
But I like what you're saying, and it makes me wonder, since you were saying a lot of people, whatever their background, might feel that sense of awe and wonder in the natural world. And that makes me think, well, maybe God intended it that way. And why do you think God would want us to have those recurring experiences of awe and wonder in the natural world?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it, you know, and I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I think I would say, for one, it causes a kind of striving and a yearning, right? I mean, you know, if God just made himself palpably present in my life without any exercise of my imagination, without any exercise of my faith, I actually don't think I would find that very meaningful. I know that sounds weird, but I think that's actually what happens in the scriptures when Laman and Lemuel see an angel, and it doesn't actually change their hearts. I think there's something inherently valuable about yearning for God and striving for God. And sometimes in the natural world, I feel very, very small.
Right.
And God doesn't necessarily feel like he's right there with me, but I still feel that there's some value in that. You know, Moses witnessed the creation, and one of his significant reactions was he realized that man was nothing.
Right.
And I take that to mean he didn't decide that human beings are insignificant or meaningless, but he discovered that he's not the center of the world.
Yeah.
And Job had to go through the same thing. God gives him a big, long lecture about the stars and all the plants and animals of the earth that he knows nothing about. And he's trying to get Job to realize that maybe your story isn't the center of the universe. Maybe you're not the most important person that ever lived. And maybe your suffering would be lifted if you let go of your need to make yourself the center.
Oh, that's interesting. And also maybe that feeling that smallness in the natural world makes us yearn for God and be open to mercy and grace, right?
Yeah, because I think in the end, nature can sometimes feel very indifferent to us, and it can be very frightening. I remember backpacking as a young boy in the Tetons in true wilderness for the first time in my life, and I remember thinking, this place doesn't care that I exist, you know, and this place has been around far longer than I've ever lived and will be far longer than I ever will. And that made me feel very, almost frightened. But then when you feel that smallness and you learn humility, when you appeal to God and he does touch you, boy, that feels so much more healing. I mean, if God's just that easy to access that I put a quarter into a vending machine and get him,
Right.
Then I don't think I would appreciate the gift of his Spirit.
Yeah, interesting. I wanted to just read a quote from some of your own nature writing. This is from Home Waters. And you said, the divine has place in the very stuff of our physical existence. Could you tell me more about that? Like, how do you see God in our physical existence or in the world around us?
Yeah, I think the theology of the Restoration is unusually clear on this compared to the rest of the Judeo-Christian tradition, because we have 3 restored accounts of the creation from Joseph Smith, the Book of Moses, the Book of Abraham, and the Endowment Ceremony. They make it very clear that there's a spiritual creation before there's a physical creation, that plants and animals are living souls.
Yeah.
And that, again, it's not obvious what it all means all the time, but I can't help but feel that I'm among divine beings when I'm in the natural world. I can't help but feel a divine presence in the physical world. And of course, we place great emphasis on the experience of the body, not only as a temporary thing, but actually as our eternal destiny, and that the earth is actually the site of the highest kingdom of God. I mean, we place a huge premium on physical experience as a vital pathway to the spiritual. And I think if you bypass it, you're not getting it right. You know, if you ignore the gifts of the body and of the earth as if it's all there for you're taking it for granted, or it's all nothing but dead matter or resources to be used, and you don't know how to experience beauty and pleasure in the body and in the earthly context we're in, I think we're missing a big part of why we're here. Section 59 of Doctrine and Covenants makes it very clear that God takes pleasure in our pleasure. He wants us to relish his creations and to feel awe and wonder and aesthetic pleasure in the color and the sound and the smell and the touch of the world.
I completely agree with you. And in your book, Home Waters, it's a memoir of sort of your year spent fly fishing on the Provo River. I'm a fly fisher also.
I know that.
I loved reading the book, and I loved the experiences that you had and the thoughts you had. And you talked about one day when you were catching a bunch of fish, and the bright colors, the yellow and the pink and the blue markings on them. And you said they were extravagant and superfluous. And I loved that that consideration of the natural world, that like so much of it is extravagant and superfluous, and I think is there for our joy, and just shows the like abundance of God's grace and the abundance of his just gifts to us, and that he wants us to, like you said, enjoy our bodies in the natural world. But
no, that's thank you for that. And I do feel I mean, obviously, if I had looked at it biologically, I could say, well, there might be an evolutionary explanation for this, that, and the other. And those are pretty fascinating things to learn, too, and they fill me with awe. They don't necessarily make God more remote to my mind at all, but I do think even in the science, the best thinkers in science today understand that it is a little bit dangerous to try to reduce everything to an explanation, and that there is a sort of mystery in the superfluousness or extravagance of nature that I think is at the heart of our experience of it. That I so I don't see science as necessarily taking away all the magic, but I do think it's okay to not know all the explanations that are out there and still appreciate beauty whenever it's made available to you.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else you want to add about these scriptures or this painting?
I just think it's a great invitation to pay attention to the world, pay attention to the creation, and to pay attention, you really have to stop paying attention to other things like your phone and your day-to-day preoccupations. I think we all need to be still enough once a day to just really look at the creation. Just this morning I was reading my scriptures on my back patio, and a hummingbird was feeding in my hummingbird feeder, but he flew over. I thought he was going to hit me in the face. He came so close to me, like he was saying thank you, and then he flew off. But he just paused right in front of my face, and I started weeping. I don't know what. It's just so beautiful. So I don't know. I just think if we pay attention, gifts are suddenly abundantly available everywhere.
Thank you so much. And
you bet.
Thanks for talking with us.
You bet.